Hello guys, so today I'm going to be talking about advanced HTML, and basically what we're going to be doing today is HTML and CSS, but we're going to be talking about the little things that we're not able to mention in our introduction to HTML class. The reason being that I wanted us to get comfortable with HTML and CSS and styling a web page before we can move over to the fun part. Now, today, there are basically a lot we're going to be talking about. It's not just about HTML. We are going to be using this time around. It's not just HTML. We're going to be using HTML interchangeably with CSS. So along the line, so you can understand how the two work hand in hand. So today, basically what we're going to be dealing today is we're going to be dealing with HTML tables. We're going to be dealing with HTML media, audio, videos, and pictures. We're going to be dealing with HTML embeds and objects. We're going to be talking about HTML iframe and HTML forms. So basically, that's what we're going to be talking about today. So without any further ado, let's just jump straight right into the coding part. So um, today, this is the video we did last time. We talked about our mental health websites. We might likely touch it if time permits, but our focus in today's class is um, tables, forms, media, and iframe. So if you look at this page, if we display this page online, you can see that we have a table here, creating student table. Now there are different structure which a table is made up of. In HTML, a table is made up of certain structure. Back in the days, people used to build structured a web page using table because those days it was a bit hard to, style a HTML page and align different elements in different positions on a web page. So the easiest and the most finest way to do stuffs on the web page was to use table. So that's how it used to be. So for us to create a table, we need to have create our first table tag. The table tag is like the parent element that wraps every other element that comes with the table. The table has quite a number of elements, and there's a way it works, and that is why I really want you to pay close attention. Every table has a header. So, and the header of a table in HTML is defined inside a tag called T head. Now, this T head is where our table header will reside. You understand? HTML in its own part captures everything that is inside this table header in a bold text, showing you that this is the header of this table. Now, another structure after the table header, another important structure is the table body tag, sorry, T body tag. This T body tag is now where the content of your table will reside, right? So we have what we call just understand that here we have two layers. We have the table tag, we have the table head, and then we have the table body. And this we say that table head contains the table header, while the table body contains the content of the table. Now the table tag wraps like the parent tag that wraps everything and tells HTML, okay, we are trying to render a table. It's quite a very powerful part of HTML. Now, in a table head, for us to define the columns, our columns and our rows, there is a tag called th. This th is used. Let's say we have three rows here. We want to have three columns, so to say. We want to have three columns. So this th is going to help us to put, let's say, item you're going to be creating an invoice table here. You have item, we have, or let's call it product, not item. We have product, we have quantity, and then we have price. So these are the columns at our table. So basically our table is going to have three columns, right? And then there's another thing here that we need to define. In every table, there is rows and there are columns, right? So if you want your table to have lots of rows, you can create as many rows as you want. But let's first start with the first row. Now, in a row, the content in a row must match the number of columns you define in this your T head, TH tag. Now we have three columns, basically product, quantity, and price. So in every row we are going to have in our content part of this table, every row must contain three columns, which is three objects or three items. That way, our table will not fall out of form. Now, let's say we have now inside the TR tag, which is known for table row, there's also a tag called TD, which is table data. This one is table head, TH table head, TR table row, TD table data. So let's say we have a wristwatch as the product. We've defined a product. Then we need to define the quantity. We have 20 pieces of this watch. And what is the price of these 20 pieces? Let's say it's $5,000. As you can see, we've defined a table with one row that have three items, that have one row, and in this row we have three columns. Now let's render this HTML page and see what it looks like. So as you can see, we now have a table called products, quantity, price. Now, generically, let me remove the styling I have here. Let me remove the styling I have here because it's affecting the table. Ideally, this is what you get when you define this type of table. The table doesn't really have a structure like that, right? So you need to define your structure. You need to style your table so that it can look a bit nice. And one way we can do that is by adding borders to our table, right? So we have let's add border to the table header and the table data because these are the things that need border, the datas and then the headers. Those are the basic things that are in the table, right? So we have table. I don't know if you guys can see my screen. Sorry about that. Let me increase the font of my uh, device so you can see. Now let's say, let me copy the styling I have here so we don't have to waste much of our time. So basically what this styling is saying is, we'll still get back to the separate style I defined. I just want us to get things quickly. Now we are just trying to tell our page that anywhere you see a table header and a table data, please, we need borders. We need you to add borders to them, and then we need you to align the text to the left, and then give them a padding of 8 pixels. That's what this styling is saying. So in CSS, remember when we talk about selectors, we have multiple selectors. Multiple selectors is a way where you can combine multiple elements which you want to have same styling, grouping elements that have same styling. So that is basically what we've done here. And as you can see, our table is aligned, but in a smaller format, right? And it is giving us what we need. And like I said earlier, we have the headers bolded. Sorry about the noise, guys. It's the rain. It's raining. So we have styled our table. Now let's say we want to define, want to add another item to this our table, invoice table. We can as well give a table a caption. We have a caption tag in HTML and call it invoice table. As you can see, we've given it invoice. And let's change, instead of wristwatch, let's change this to iPhone. Let's say three iPhone X, three pieces, call it $25,000, and we have this, right? So this is how you can start, you can structure a table. And then a table can go on and on and on and have as many rows as you want them. But also remember, always remember, the data you have in a row must match the number of columns you have. If you have three columns, the data table data must have three items in the row. If you have four, then you must make sure that they are four. Now, if now we added an extra column, as you can see, our data are out of place because we don't have up to four items in our rows. Now, if we add one item here, as you can see, it's matched. But let's assume we have more than four elements in a row. There will be an overlap. Are you seeing it? The table is looking a bit disorganized because the columns, which is the table headers, does not match the table rows, the number of items in the row. So please take note of that. Let me return this back to the way it was. Then let's remove this second price here. So our table is structured. Okay. Now let's say, let me remove this creating this title and change this to advanced HTML. So that we don't have conflict. Now we can choose to give this table some bit of more padding. We can say, okay, we've given this the padding. We can say, uh, sorry, this form shouldn't be here. This shouldn't be here. Right. So we can decide to style the entire table by giving them, say, border, and do border, do border collapse. Yeah, border collapse, and then put collapse. Let's see what that does. So what it does is this border collapse. What it does is it removes the extra padding. Let me comment this out. Now there is no border on this table. What you can see is the borders on each block of elements within this table. The table header are individual items, which is product, and all of them are individually given their box borders, right? Each box has its own borders. But when we define a table tag and then we say box border collapse, what it means is, please, all the elements within this table, let's collapse the borders and let the border that is going to exist be the one enclosing the entire table. So if we add this border collapse, as you can see our table is a little bit nicer, and then it is a proper demarcation instead of individual boxes having their own borders. Right, so that is that. We can as well style this our table to increase in width. Instead of being smaller in size, we can say let's give it a width of let's say, let's not do specific size. Let's use let's say 70% of the screen, right? So as you can see, our table is extended, and I want to push this to the center. I will do what's it called? I will do, okay, let's do margin. Um, let's do margin. Uh, let's do margin auto 20 pixels. No, let's do up 10. If we give the width, if we give the width, this short form gives the 10 pixels is for up and bottom margin is going to be 10 pixels each. Then the width, we want the width to automatically align itself. The reason why I didn't take effect the first time I did it was because I am now giving the width, the spacing within the left and the right, a definite size, which won't give us that center alignment. But when you use, we just style the top and the bottom. We just give the top and the bottom a spacing, outside spacing, and then we now set auto so that the box can automatically give equal width, equal spacing within the left and the right part of the table. So as you can see, our table is now in the center, and then we can bold our caption. We can say table caption text uh, font weight and say 700 and say text what is it called, text transform. Want to make it a capital letter, text transform capitalize. These are properties for styling text in CSS. So let's give this caption a padding of 10 pixels. 10 pixels. So, right. Now, as you can see, we now have a table, invoice table here, and we have price, product, and all that. Now, there's more we can do to this table, right? We can decide to style individual box in the table, right? There's quite a lot you can do, but what I normally do is I will allow you to go figure it out, modify this table. I'll give you a sample of what I want you to build. You will go into it and then see how you can achieve that. That way you are doing work and you are learning by yourself. Okay? Then, and it also help you to do more research about this whole thing. Then there's an important thing again we need to talk about these tables that are very, very important. There is what we call row span and co-span. Now let me give us an example. If you look at this table here, okay, it's not here. Let me load that page. I built a page for this purpose as a sample, which is basically what you're going to be replicating after this class. So now, as you can see, this is a table, right? But somehow you might not really know if it's a table if not for this part here. But that's that. For the record, this is a table. And this table, we have, this is the one we are working on currently. This is a typical invoice table. Now, this invoice table, where there's a place where we have this total, the last part of this invoice content, the total part span through how many columns? One, two, three. Then on the fourth one, it stops. So span, row span, and co-span is a way of giving tables different alignments and moving items in different directions when it comes to table. Now, let me show you. When you apply a row span, you are actually moving item across rows, across various columns, right? When you are using a code span, you are moving columns across different rows. I'll show you what I mean by that. Uh, Rows, columns span across columns. Sorry, code span spans a table, a single column across other columns. While rows span, sorry, also do the same thing. It spans across rows. Now we're going to be seeing an example of what that looks like. Let's get back to our code. We have, okay, yeah, let's go back to our index. It's on our index. Now we have our table with iPhone, we have Samsung F23 Ultra, and then we have to, let's give it 26. Now we have a third item to be, and but we want to add a third item called total. We want to add a total row on this invoice. Now, what's going to happen? We have to create a table row first to add a new row. Now we want just one item in this row. Don't want plenty. And then what we want to name it, or let's say we just want two basically. Let's say total, and then the value of this, the total value of this item on this table. So 5,000 plus 25,000, that's 30. That's $30,000. $30,000 plus $26,000. That's 30 plus 25. Okay, $30,000 plus 20. That's 51, $56,000, right? So let's put this as $56,000. Okay. Now, if you look at this table now, you will see that this our 56,000 total is under quantity, but we want to move it under price. And if we say let's add another item here, it is now under price. And let's say we decide to okay remove this one now to be empty. Let's see what happens. This one is empty. This can work, right? But for me, there are two ways. You can use CSS to remove the border here so nobody will know that this is not spanning across, but that's not the ideal way. Let's see how to span. Let's remove this part now and let's leave it here. I want to span this column now. I want to span this total across two columns. We have three columns. Now we'll now say we want to do a code span. Is it a code span? Yeah, I think. Let's see two. And what did you see? This total has span across this first column and the second column, and it has pushed because it is spanning. That means it's occupying two columns. Then our price is now pushed to the right place. This is the ideal thing to do, and we've achieved this, right? So, assuming we have these two price now, let's change this $26,000 to 25,000, and let's see if we can do a row span. Because these two prices are the same, we have $25,000 and $25,000. We want to see if we can merge these two rows together so that they can have the same price. Now, if we come to this 25,000 here, let's do a row span. Let's start with the iPhone. Let's do a row span of 2. Okay, so are you seeing what happened? What happened now? It has pushed one out. Now, assuming we don't have any here, are you seeing it? Now, these two have the same price. So they are now calculated at 25,000. I'm just trying to show you how row span and co-span work. You can go ahead and research more, practice so you get used to them and know how they work. Now, I think we are done with our table. Now, let me just go over this invoice because that will be your assignment. Uh, so at least that will help you to stretch your hands and your brain and research and know how this table thing work. Now we have this table. I'll just go over the structure. Let's leave the CSS part of it. Let me comment out the C. Let me like collapse the CSS. Now we have this table. This table is wrapped up inside a main. The reason why it's wrapped up inside a main so that we can, you know, utilize the HTML semantic element and then use the main to move the table around the body of the HTML. So that's basically it. There's no fancy rule to that. I just decided to put it that way. Now we have quite an interesting rules here, quite an interesting one. If you can see, our table data now on this invoice part is not, let me reduce this, is not um, containing just text. Now it's containing a div, and this div is containing an image, right? So it's not just text that you can use. You can literally use a table to design a full page if you want to, if you are really good with it. Now, people who are good with people who are good with tables most of the times get the jobs of designing invoice and then invoice template for different companies so that they can have a soft copy of their invoices to dispatch to their different various clients, right? So as you can see, this table tag has this row. The first row of this table has just one item, which is indicated by this table data. And this one item contains a div, right? So inside this div, you have an image. Now, if you look at it, this is the Fasticor logo we have here. That's it. And then there's some styling, there's some inline styling I added. You can make it an external styling or internal styling, whichever works for you. But it's always good you style outside. You use external styling so that you can to help you on create style that you can reuse over time. So here now we have uh, an image. This image is quite big. We'll have to reduce it using the width and height attribute of the image tag HTML. So as you can see, we gave it a width of 150 and height of 60. So that is why it's looking small. If we remove this, you see that the image will be very big. As you can see, it's very big, right? So that's why we need to do that. Then we have this. Then we now went further to use flexbox to align the image at the center, right? So I did display flex, justify content center, align item center. So that is why it's on the center. Now, I now have another row. Now, first row is gone. One beautiful thing about table is that it helps you define at what row what will be there. You just know your entire page is arranged in rows and columns. So here we have the second row that has the Fasticor invoice, and then we have the invoice number. Let's go over to the second one. So this is just also a single item. Everything here is a single item, but inside that single, which you can see table data, and we have a co-span. If you look at this entire invoice, it has how many columns? A total of 1, 2, 3, 4. So this invoice is made up of 4 columns, right? Now just one, we just want one column, right? We just want one item on this row. Same thing we did here. I forgot to mention we added a code span on this our first row, which contains our logo. We want this this data, this one data that is inside this row to span across all the columns. Hence the cospan 4 that we added. If you remove this cospan 4, the HTML will interpret this as just a single item, and because the table is already a 4 column table, it won't look nice. It's going to make everything. You see, it's just on the 1 column size of the entire document, which doesn't make sense. So for us to have this logo span across and still be at the center, we had to introduce a code span here. So that's how it is. Then this second one is also a single data, but inside the single data we have two divs. This two div, one is containing the title of the invoice, and the other one is containing the invoice number. So we use the CSS property called float left and float right to move them to the left and right. So the invoice title is on the left while the invoice number is on the right. Okay, so inside the invoice number, you have to be creative for you to get a very good design. In the invoice number, we have the small tag displaying the title, invoice number, and then the main invoice here. Okay, so that's basically it. And then here is the invoice address, to the person you are sending the invoice to, and then the address of the business. Some people will have this address of the business on the right hand side. So it's your choice, and depending on the invoice design you want to build, right? Um, and then after that row, as you can see, we did not everything here. We have how many rows? First is the row for the logo. Second is the invoice title row. Third row is the address part, and then the fourth row is the invoice header. I'm sorry, the table header. Now, all these things are inside the table head, right? So you are not only limited to have only one row on the table head, you can have as many. Like I said, all these things it depends on what you want to achieve. So we have um 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 rows in this our table head. So our header has technically 4 rows. Now we come to the table body, we have about 1, 2, 3, and 4. We have 4 rows as well. So the head have 4 rows, and the body also have 4 rows. So that is basically it. And then we have T foot. Now that's another beautiful thing I didn't mention earlier. This T foot is the footer um, of the table. The one we did here, we didn't add footer, we just used total. We also used a row, which is fine. But this one is implementing the semantic element tag so that on viewing it, you know that this is the head and this is the footer. And these are for people who are using these tables to design PDFs, and then using tables to design what's it called? Pages, HTML pages. So just take note of that. Then also remember the co-span and the row span, their functions. So basically, that's it for tables. Hello guys, it's Victor here again today. So we're going to be discussing forms. The first part of this video, we talked about how to um, style a table, how to use a table to design an invoice and all that. So the second part is that we're going to be see how a form, understanding how the form works, and then how to excuse me, how to style a form, right? So we'll just jump right into the code, and then here is the page we have. Initially I had a login page as well, but I decided to comment it out. And in this one, I'm going to be creating a new HTML document. So we can start off with a clean sheet. Let's say live form.html. Right, so we have a form. Then put our title, excuse me, and then we'll have an empty page, right? So this is the old one we had before. So we're going to be designing from scratch. So let me remove this. I can only pick it up maybe when I want to reference something. This doesn't need to be here as well. Let's take this out as well. So we are now left with only live form. Let me zoom in my screen so you can all can see it clearly. Right, so let me do a H1 and say form design. Before H1, let me do a main. We'll have an H1. I want to give this H1 an inline style of text align center. So let's render this to the browser. Open with LiveWire. LiveWire has opened it for us. You can see our design is totally, sorry about that. As you can see, our design on the page. Let me zoom in my screen so you can see. So our form design is sitting right at the center of the page. Now let's move back to our form. We want to design a form. In this main, let's just put this into a section. Let's put this H1 into a section so that our HTML can have a bit of structure. And we can call this the title of our website. We can use uh, title. Let me use ID. I'll call it title. So now we're going to be designing the form section, and then let's give this ID form. And sorry about the keyboard noise. Here we are going to um, write an input element. Now, having done this, see our results. As you can see, we have two input boxes and they are all aligning right beside each other, right? So there's some things we need to clear out a bit here. Input, input elements inside a form is a way of sending requests to a server, or let's just put it is a way where the program or the browser collects inputs from the user, and then these inputs are necessary or needed for a program to complete its process. So at some point, you will have a form on your different type of websites where someone will have to either fill in their details to register or fill in their details to log in, or most probably might be another thing that requires a user input. So one way to pass a user to fetch a user input is using the form. So with the HTML form, we will be able to collect data from a user as an input, and then we'll send it to the backend that will process the logic and then utilize that data that was submitted effectively. So that's how important forms are, right? So in the writing of a form, you need a form tag, form elements, and then you have a method, you have an action. Now, this action is a very important attribute in a form tag because it helps to collect the URL to the server or where the program that is going to process this form is located. So most time basically it's a URL, either within your website, your own website domain you're working on, or outside your website domain. But the bottom line here is that whatever that comes into this action box is always a link to a resource, a program that will make use of whatever that is being submitted and then process it and give out an output, right? So this is really, really important. Now we have another important attribute in a form called get, called method, sorry. The method attribute helps to, the method attribute helps to determine how the form is going to be processed. Now, there are two attributes this form collects by default, by standard, is get and post. A get request is when you are passing the data that was submitted to the URL of a website. Another way is the post. If we change this to post now, and it mustn't be capital letter. So just so you know, it must not be in caps. You can have it small letter. So when you use a post request to submit data, it's telling the browser, please, this form you're about to process or send the inputs, please don't send it over the URL. Send it over the browser network. Now the browser network will, from there, it will connect to the server or the service that is going to process or make the service that is going to make use of this input. Then once the data are passed through the browser network, from the browser network, the the logic that is going to process the input will connect to the browser logic, pick up this data, and then process it and return back an output again, still through the browser network. Now, this is a more secured way to process forms because most times you will have users submit sensitive data to your website. So you wouldn't want that data to be exposed. That is why it is passed over the network. Sometimes some data is passing through the network are encrypted so that third party won't know. Right. So now I've explained this and then I'm going to give some example. Let's assume we have a name here. There is what we call a name. I'll still come back to this. Let's call it a name. And then let's say name. And then we refresh. It's already good. So here we decide to type out something. I want to make sure that this is a get request. So and I want this to submit to let me create another file that is going to collect where this request is going to be sent to. Let's call it test.html. But basically, in a standard way, what's supposed to be here is a link to a server logic or a backend logic. You don't put a HTML link here, right? Unless you want to pass the you want to process the inputs on the front end on the browser, right? So let's leave it this way. And then we have a name imputed here. Let's add a submit button to this form. You cannot do a form without having a button that submits unless you want to create a function in JavaScript that can do that for you automatically. But we are teaching HTML and CSS today, so we're not discussing JavaScript. We're typing. Right, so this is it. The button also has a type attribute. I will explain the type attribute in a second. Just hang in there with me. Then the type here should be submit, right? So as you can see, we now have an input box. Let me also put something like a placeholder. I will give this our little input box a description. So as you can see, our form is making sense. It has a little description that says enter name. I'm going to enter my name and I'm going to submit it. As you can see, I submitted this request and our URL changed to test.html, which is the URL we added here, test.html. That is what is pushing out. And then if you notice one peculiar thing, the URL changed. The URL before was live.html. Now when we do a submit, it will change to text.html. Now that's because it has moved from the page, excuse me, it has moved from the page where the request originated to another page. So, and then that's why the URL changed. You can also process a form in the same page. You understand? Even when you're using a server-side language like PHP or Python or even JavaScript. So, but that's a story for another day. All right. So here we have name Victor Ani. Right. So what happens in this URL? If you watched our video on introduction to programming, we talked about how the web works and we talked about URL, and then we just dissected how the URLs are broken down. And as you can see, we have the domain, which is the page, test.html. Then we have other parameters here. We have a name parameter, and this name is the name that is here. We have a name called name. So this name is now passed to the URL because this request is a get request because of the method get. Now it's passing the name I submitted in the URL, as you can see. Name equals to Victor plus Annie. Now the space in between the name they use plus to bond it up. That's how the browser patterns and breaks down URL the way it will understand it, right? And that is because we are passing this request as a get and it's passed over the URL. But now let's imagine if we pass this request down to using a post. What are we going to achieve? And let's go back to our main page and then let's refresh. If we refresh, it has refreshed. And let's submit Victor again. If we submit, you're now getting a 4 5 error. There's an error. The reason being that um we are supposed to process every post request is supposed to be processed through the network, calling a service, most of the times a backend service that will process the logic. So that is what it's trying to do. And get requests, post request doesn't go through the browser URL bar. It goes to the network, and I'm going to show you. Let's still go back again and refresh. And then I'm going to open my developer tools and I'm going to show you. Okay, let's right click. Supposed to have inspect here. So all we'll do inspect. And then when you open your browser tool, please take note, it's very important. You understand what is going on here. This tab called element is where you have all the elements already on this page, right? If I click on this arrow key now, it means I can select any item on this page and then it will take me directly to where the code is located. And I can as well equally see the styles on the right hand side, right? So this has sometimes might be using these dev tools to debug your CSS styling to make sure they are in the right position. And then we have the most important thing we want to talk about is network. Now let's submit this request again called Victor Annie, and we are submitting it over the network. You will see there's a response. And the reason why there's a response over the network, it is transmitting, but because an error occurred, it stopped somewhere. This place, this thin line, that's where it stops. So if we still make use of the same package, Hello, sorry guys. So if you still want to, if we go ahead to attach a programming service like a backend service to this form and then we process it, you find out that the request will go freely and then give us a response. But because it is not tied, it's tied to a HTML page and it cannot be passed. A HTML page cannot be passed over the network because it's not a programming language for the backend, so it's not going to show. So, but this indication here is showing that a request was initiated but encountered error 405. So that's it for action. Then let's go over to um, styling this form now. Having defined all this, let's talk about the attributes we are seeing. If you look at this input tag, we have some quite interesting attributes here. We have the type attribute, we have the placeholder attribute, and then we have the name attribute. The type attribute defines the type of input you are requesting from the user. Now, the placeholder is like a false description that is inside the input box. You saw it on the last example we treated. It's telling, giving a description to that box. Sometimes you don't want to add an extra label on top of the input box. So most websites you see, they use this placeholder to describe what the input box is doing so that it can guide the user in knowing the right thing to enter into the input box. Now, we also have the name tag. This name is very, very important for your backend processing because as you can see, when we submitted this request using a get, when we submitted this form using a get, automatically this name parameter was picked, right? And then because the backend only see this key called name, so it's going to see it. So if I pass, let's say site gig here, this is what it's going to see. So whenever a form is submitted, it will pick the key inside this name with the value the person type in and submit to the backend. So when the backend sees this, the request is going to see the key here and the value the person types that is submitted. That's how it worked. It works. So you just have to be careful and then know, make sure you don't omit this name because if you omit it, there's no way the HTML can submit it. And even if you actually submit it, this the value entered will be omitted because there's no key for it to match your input with when sending to the server. I believe that makes sense. Okay, so now if I perform this request, I've changed our method to get. Let's see what we have. If I go back and refresh and put in my name again, Victor Ani, then I decide to submit. As you can see, we now have, instead of name now as the key, we now have uh, the gibberish I typed, which is side gig equals to Victor Annie. The side gig is the value inside this name. So this name is going to, anytime a form is submitted, there is a value in the name that is using to match hand in hand with the sorry, it is the what the key, the name you give to the name attributes becomes the key that will hold the value the user will type in. Okay, I believe that makes sense. And same goes to button. Initially, before now, this is how input button are done in form in HTML. You can put an input type and you can call it submit and then put value and then maybe call it submit. If I do that, let me go back and refresh. You will see it's the same thing. It's looking like the same button. This is how it is done before now. But I don't like using this. You can use it if you want, but it is no longer, people no longer use it. So I rather choose to use a button which is more readable and semantically looking nice. And then I'll give it a type of submit. What it means is that it's not the HTML is not going to, because it's inside the form and then it's a button. HTML is not going to interpret it as a regular button. It's going to interpret it as a submit button, right? So because of this type submit, we also have the type button. If you put type button, it means that this button will not submit the form, right? What it means is that it is going to see this button as a regular button. I believe that made sense. So let's go back, refresh our page, see what we have. So we have two base. Let me remove the one button. So there's quite other attributes you can add here, but I will indulge us to go and make research and note that type of attribute one can add. We have disabled. When you have disabled, what it means is that nobody can edit it. We have read only. It's the same thing as disabled. But disabled read only means uh, can only you can't type. You can only read what is inside. Assuming we have something, we have a value. We have a value attribute which accepts a value. Let's say I want to put a value inside the form with that, and because it's read only there, I don't want users to type anything in there, but I want to display a value. I can say my name is Victor. So I can see my name is Victor, but I can't edit it. I can't type here because why? It's read only. You understand? There's quite a couple of other attributes. I'm just showing us the ones that are important. So you go ahead and research more to know more about this. All the attributes we have in forms in HTML. We then go over to what's it called? We have disabled. So now we have let's just have an input called test. So you can see we have two input box. And we want to also give it a placeholder and the name. Then, okay, I didn't finish up. I was talking about another attribute called required, very important. We'll see it in action soon. Required as well. So this one is text. Both of them are text type text. So what that means is that once you put required attributes in a input box, once submit button is clicked, if nothing is entered, it should throw this error, please fill out this field. That's what required does. And even if I fill this one now and decide to submit, you still ask me to fill this one because all of them are required. It's a simple HTML validation you can attribute you can add to your um, web forms when you are designing your form. Alright, so we have form design. Okay, so basically the next phase of this whole training is to style this our form, right?